because I go through the vocab and that type of thing too. All right, if-then statements. If-then statements show cause and effect. Now, some of them are true, some of them are not necessarily true. So let's look at the first one. If it's raining, then it's spring. Is that true or not necessarily true? We got a lot of shakings of the heads, which means not necessarily true. Because it could be summer and it's raining. It could even be winter. It's rained in the middle of winter before. So that one's not necessarily true. If x and y are whole numbers, then their difference is a whole number. Well, let's think about that. A whole number is like 6 or 2 or 7 or something like that. Okay? What's 6 minus 2? 4. That's a whole number, right? What's 12 minus 1? 11. That's a whole number, right? So would that be true? Kind of sounds like it, except for what's 6 minus 12? -6. Is -6 a whole number? No, it's called an integer. Whole numbers are like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on up. Okay, it doesn't include the negative numbers. So this one is a false statement. This one's a false statement. Let's look at the next one. If water is heated, then it's boiled. A lot of times once you heat water, it boils, but is all hot water boiling water? No. So that one's not necessarily true. A triangle with a right angle. If a triangle has a right angle, then it's a right triangle. That's a true one. Any triangle with a right angle is called a right triangle. If your favorite color is blue, then you're a good speller. That's not necessarily true. Okay, so we look at if-then statements and we determine the truth value of it, and we'll get to truth values here in a little bit. Okay, so we have 3 vocab words right here. Okay, so for conditional, okay, when it comes to the quiz, it'll contain this whole sentence, but all you have to do is write this part for conditional. It's an if-then statement. Okay, a conditional is an if-then statement that relates a hypothesis to a conclusion, but on your vocab sheet, just write down that it's an if-then statement, and that should be good enough for me for the vocab sheet. Okay, the hypothesis is the part that follows the if. The conclusion is the part that follows the then. Okay, so those are the 3 things that you're going to write on your vocab sheet. So a conditional is an if-then statement. The hypothesis is the part that follows the if. The conclusion is the part that follows the then. Thomas, you need to have a geometry folder and a physical science or a biology folder and a different folder for each class. So then you whip out the folder for geometry when you're looking for your vocab sheet. You whip it out and then you write down your vocab words. It's much better to be organized than disorganized. Well, let's figure out a way to get you organized, man. It's got to be somewhere in there. All right, we're going to move on, Thomas, without you. So, conditionals are represented by P arrow Q, which means if P, then Q. Okay? So, we'll see different arrows and different symbols today. But when you see this, P, then Q, a smaller letter than a earlier letter in the alphabet than a later letter in the alphabet, that means the hypothesis leads to the conclusion. Now, it says, write this statement as a conditional statement. You can register to vote if you're at least 18 years old. Well, what part's the hypothesis? Is it registered to vote or 18 years old? Well, we can rewrite this as an if-then statement. If And the hypothesis is what follows the if. If you are 18 years old, at least, forgot the at least. If you're at least 18 years old, then you can register to vote. Now that's now written as an if-then statement instead of just a statement with an if-then there. Okay? So what is the hypothesis? You are I just wrote it as your, so we'll leave it as your. You're at least 18 years old. Conclusion? You can register to vote. Okay? Hypothesis, conclusion. Okay, statement A. What's your hypothesis? If my teacher signs an essay, then I will type it. Statement A. What's my hypothesis? My teacher assigns an essay. Okay? What's my conclusion? I will type it. Statement B. If I will type my essay, then I will need to print it out. What's my hypothesis? I will type my essay, which was my conclusion of the previous one. Now it's in a hypothesis because it follows an if statement. What's the conclusion? Then I will need to print it out. Okay, so know the difference between the hypothesis and conclusion. Okay, next two words for your vocab sheet. Truth table is a statement or true or false according to whether the statements are true or false. That's a truth value. A statement of true or false according to whether the statements are true or false. A truth table lists all the possible combinations of truth values for two or more statements. Amelia, you should be writing these two things down. All right. I think truth tables are kind of confusing, so we're not going to worry about looking at truth tables in here. We're just going to figure out whether things are true or false. Okay? Plain and simple. We'll look at a statement, try to figure out if they're true or false. Such as this. If a number is even, then it's divisible by 2. True or false? True. All even numbers are divisible by 2. Okay, here we go with more vocab. Okay, a conditional statement is if the hypothesis, then the conclusion. The converse reverses the hypothesis and the conclusion. So if conclusion, then hypothesis. So a converse reverses the hypothesis and the conclusion of a conditional. A converse reverses the hypothesis and conclusion of a conditional. A negation is a statement that has the opposite meaning of the original statement. So when they put a little curly Q in front of something, it means the opposite of or not. If they say something is blue, then the negation of that is something is not blue. Okay? So the little curly Q means not. The negation has the opposite meaning of an original statement. The inverse is when you do the nots for both the hypothesis and the conclusion in that order. So if not the hypothesis, then not the conclusion. And finally, the contrapositive is obtained by negating and reversing both the hypothesis and the conclusion of the conditional, which is the same. Basically, it's the converse with nots. If not the conclusion, then not the hypothesis. So basically, it's the nots of the converse is the contrapositive. All right, let's look at this statement. If you play the trumpet, then you play a brass instrument. Is that a true or false statement? True. Trumpet is a true statement. So that's the conditional statement. Let's look at the converse of that. Let's look at the converse of this conditional statement. If you play a brass instrument, then you play the trumpet. That is the converse, because we switched the hypothesis and conclusion around. Now, is that a true or false statement? That's false, because you could also play a baritone or a tuba or something like that. and play a brass instrument. So that is a false statement. So sometimes when you turn statements around, they're true. Other times, if the conditional statement is true, sometimes the converse is false, like we saw there. Okay? All right. Let's look at the inverse and contrapositive of this statement. If two whole numbers are both even, then their sum is even. Okay? Which is a true statement. The converse of that would be if the sum of two whole numbers is even, then the whole numbers are even, and that would be a false statement. If we look at the inverse of that, if two whole numbers are both, what's not even mean? Odd. Not even is odd, right? Okay. If two whole numbers are both odd, then their sum is odd. Okay? Let's look at odd number plus an odd number. 1 plus 3, 4. Is that an odd number? No. So this is a false statement. Okay, let's look at the contrapositive. If two numbers have an odd sum, then the two numbers are odd. Okay? Because it's not and not. It's just switch them around, then not. So it's odd in this case. If two numbers have an odd sum, then the two numbers are odd, which again is false. You have to have an odd plus an even to get an odd sum. So both of those are false. Biconditionals. We won't worry about the truth statement, but we will worry about biconditional. A biconditional is the combination of a conditional and its converse. Don't worry about writing B, then Q, then Q, then B. A combination of a conditional and its converse. And it always has if and only if. Here. It will always have if and only if. So if you write the parts that are in the brackets, a combination of a conditional and its converse, and put a comma then, and it'll say if and only if. So if you have if and only if, you're looking at a biconditional. So when we look at biconditionals, we want a true hypothesis and a true conclusion to write the biconditional. So it can be written both ways. Okay? So a marine biologist writes, if a seahorse gives birth, then it is male. Since it is true among seahorses that only males can become pregnant and give birth, should the marine biologist state this as biconditional? And they sure can if they want. So how would we write if a seahorse gives birth, then it is male as a biconditional? Well, we'd write a seahorse is male if and only if it, sorry, dang it, screwed that up. A seahorse gives birth. If and only if it is male. That's one way of writing it. Now, could I write a seahorse is male if and only if it gives birth? And the answer is yes. You can state it both ways. All right. So, what are the two conditionals implied by this biconditional? So, if and only if makes it a biconditional. So, the first condition would be if a triangle is equilateral, then it has three sides. How would I write my second one? If a triangle, what? How would I write it? The other one, the other conditional. Illy. If a triangle has three congruent sides, then it is equilateral. A biconditional can be written two different ways, or can have conditionals that are written two different ways. Because since both of these are true, you can write it as if hypothesis then conclusion, or if conclusion then hypothesis. Okay? And both all be true. So this is what we covered today. A conditional statement is an if then statement. Its converse is when you switch them around. An inverse is if not the conditional, then not the hypothesis. A contrapositive is if not the conclusion, then not the hypothesis. And a biconditional has if and only if in the middle of a hypothesis and a conclusion. And you want them both to be true. All right, so section 1.5 is what we're doing today. You should have about, a good half hour yet. We get out of 14 and it's 50, so 24 minutes. Next time we're going to do two sections in class. We're going to do two sections, so we are going to start speeding up a little bit in here. We kind of started off a little slow to kind of get you into the process and all that, but now we're going to start speeding up a little bit, so get ready to speed up in here.